And now on Radio 3, Traditional Music. And today we begin a new series with Brian Eno, Sounds from Within, focusing on that most exotic of folk instruments, the human voice. At the end, I'll be letting you have details of how to find out more about the music and recordings used in the programme, which is introduced now by the producer, John Thornley.
Simbuzu nambara awambaye nganiwe ngombuye andakumbuye rubinga atwagendanye zitagenzanya ayitwa bararuhiga n'umugenzi nifuza ndamukunda iminsi yose.
Hello and welcome to Sounds from Within, 3 programmes in which we'll be looking at the use of the voice in traditional music from all around the world. In the studio I have with me Brian Eno, composer and visual artist, record producer, visiting professor at the Royal College of Art and the Royal College of Music, an early pioneer of tape looping and other forms of sonic manipulation, composer of ambient music, releases such as Music for Airports, and most recently he's been developing generative music. What is that, Brian?
It's a way of composing music which is never finished, effectively. What happens is that instead of giving the world a piece of music, you give the world a kind of system that constantly generates new music. You might say that these are infinitely long compositions, if anybody wants any of those.
Well, it does sound as if it has quite a lot in common with some of the music we'll be hearing in these programmes, self-evolving and developmental. Brian, I know you've used traditional music in a collaboration with David Byrne called My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. That was 15 years ago, but I think your interest in world music goes back even further, doesn't it?
I've listened to ethnic music as a source of inspiration and ideas for a very, very long time, I think since the mid-60s, really. I'm particularly interested, I think, in vocal techniques and in the way people use the most simple and basic human instrument, the voice, and in the very, very strange things they think of doing with it. And I hope we'll be looking at some of those in these programmes.
Well, the song we've just been listening to is from Burundi, and it's a whispering song of praise to a benefactor. Some of the singers say that the reason for this whispering style is to give a better balance between the voice and the accompanying instrument, which is quite quiet. It's a zither known as the inanga. But it does sound as if the origins of this singing style might go a bit deeper than that.
I would think so. I think there is a tradition in Africa of very personal music. There's an instrument which is called a mouth bow, which can only be heard by the player. You play the instrument against your teeth. Nobody else can really hear it. The main sound is through your bones, actually. And I think there's a tradition of somewhat intimate, non-public music in Africa.
Well, the next piece we're going to hear does have that kind of private quality too, doesn't it? It's another piece from Burundi called Bees.
Bees, yes. This comes from a group of people for whom bees are a very important part of the local economy. And this is a song both in praise of bees and about ways of making them do what you want. What I really love about that piece is that basic guitar riff that goes underneath, which sounds exactly like from a John Lee Hooker blues record. And you can so clearly hear the beginning of blues in music like that. That beautiful, lovely, lilting voice. And this rhythmic riffing approach, which has become, of course, the basis of most of the popular music we hear now, via Africa and then America, is also audible in this next piece from the master musicians of Tanzania. This is an absolutely beautiful song which has that African Arabic style of very decorated, beautiful unison melodic singing.
And these little catches in the voice.
Yes, it's a gorgeous song, I think. I'm sure this would be a real hit if they released it as a single. So what you're hearing here is some kind of a thumb piano. They tie little pieces of wire and metal around the tongues of the mbira, and those things buzz and hum and rattle. It's an interesting thing that you only really hear in African music, I think, of making a lot of extra noise around the instrument. It's something we always try to suppress in our instruments. And then shortly you'll hear the voices come together in unison and do this beautiful, arabesque is the only word for the melody.
Tunakia kujivunia utamaduni wetu wa Tanzania. Tunakia kujivunia muziki wetu kweli wa Tanzania. Na nyimbo zetu kweli za Tanzania. Na siasa yetu kweli ya Tanzania. Na maisha yetu haya ya Tanzania. Tunakia kujivunia muziki wetu kweli wa Tanzania.
And that's a song called Nongolo, Suffering, from Tanzania. And now, going to the other extreme, from whispers, here are some cries. Well, that throaty singing and lots of vibrato and a feeling of real tension and shouting, that's a prairie chicken dance from the Blackfoot Indians of the Northern Plains. The song passed down from generation to generation, and it's said to have been given by the spirit of the prairie chicken. The dancer imitates the movements of a mating prairie chicken, whatever those may be. And
imitates the sound as well, I think, rather.
That's a very characteristic melodic line of Native American singing, isn't it? With that very emphatic high note at the start in a shrieking tone, and then moving gradually down in a sort of terraced way till it gets right to the bottom of the register.
I find it a very hard style of singing to enjoy. I've tried very hard with American Indians and never really had much luck with
I don't think they want you to enjoy it.
No, perhaps not. No, it's probably not.
It's just supposed to put the fear of God into you.
Yes, well, yes, it nearly does that.
In this first programme of Sounds from Within, with Brian Eno, we'll be looking at some of the curious ways, well, curious to us that is, in which high and low voices are used in traditional cultures. And you can't get much lower than this.
Well, this is Tibetan singing, where the whole body is almost treated as a single resonator. It's a very difficult style of singing to master, I think, and it produces this extremely deep singing, which is characteristic of Tibetan religious music. This piece is an excerpt from a 7.5-hour performance.
Those were Tibetan Buddhist monks of the Jutta Tantric College at Dalhousie in Himachal Pradesh, and they were reciting a tantra known as the Sangwa Dupa. I find that really moving, the way it drops down at the end in that little sort of spoken glissando cluster, as if it's falling into the infinite depths of outer space. It did sound as if each monk was trying to find his own fundamental note in that piece. They say that these extremely low notes are only possible if the vocal cords are particularly relaxed, so that the whole physiology reverberates. But this very low singing is found elsewhere in Asia, isn't it? Most notably in Tuva, in southern Siberia, on the northwestern border with Mongolia.
Tuva is a very strange little republic. It evolved a very peculiar style of singing. In fact, this has recently been revived. It's become quite popular again. It was on the point of dying out a few years ago, but a lot of young people became interested in it. This piece we're going to hear is a collaboration between a young Russian electronic composer called Ivan Sokolovsky and a Tuvinian who is claimed to have the deepest voice on earth, whose name is Kuve Jin. This was recorded in Moscow, I think, 3 years ago and released as quite a successful record, actually. So Tuvinian music is not by any means either archaic or marginalized. It has re-entered, to some extent, the mainstream.
Jin from Tuva, a man said to have the lowest voice in the world. You also find that very resonant bass voice in the folk music of Albania, northwestern Greece, and among the Vlach shepherds, and also on the island of Sardinia, where ensembles of men gather in a tight circle with their hands clasped behind one ear, so their voices resonate in a very special way. And they perform playful dance songs at local festivals and competitions, and there's a very resonant bass drone.
This type of singing, for me, really captures the thrill of singing in a group. It must be so fantastic to be able to do this. When you're singing harmony with a group of other people, you lose the sense of which voice is yours, actually. When the voices are so well melded together as this, you lose track of what you're singing. You just become part of that sound.
C'è una veste arrivata, fino a intro e sa luna e non ha battito Perras de sandalione, como nos pruscorría, se esprena de soldados de bases e Un giovane artista manizza su pennello con tanta Un giovane artista salotta e prato bello, serva de lezione professor militarista. Fantino sedileso, scurrene a caddunudo che ne sedda e ne Cadderi sedileso, sa tutto sa sfamiglia, vol manda su saluto, su cuore,
That was a quartet of men from a Sardinian village performing a Balu song called Mutos, with the characteristic sound of the basu at the bottom of the harmony. And that brings us to overtone singing, because if you sing one note in the lower register of the voice and change the shape of the mouth and the throat, you can produce a whole set of overtones to that single note.
Mm-hmm. It's not that hard to do badly. For instance, if I go... I'm singing one note, but you can hear another note moving above, can't you? I mean, I agree, I don't do it very well.
Well, you can, but the way they do it, it's so this penetrating whistling at the top. It's so amazing, isn't it?
I think it's a combination of that thing we were talking about earlier, of having a very relaxed throat and using almost whistling, actually. You're blowing the harmonic out, so that the low note is just a kind of carrier frequency that you produce with as little effort as possible, and the breath goes into blowing through the lips, as it were.
Well, it's a technique that was traditionally practiced in Mongolia and also in Tuva, and this is an example from Tuva of a variety of overtone singing styles.
Yeah, this style of singing, overtone singing, is called humi, and this is a rather unusual example in that there's more than one person doing it. You normally hear it as a solo. Here there are three people singing together.
And we also have a Jew's harp, which is very much the same kind of thing as overtone singing applied to an instrument. It's an instrument which is placed half in the mouth, and there's a flexible tongue of wood or metal which is vibrated in certain ways to produce the same kind of overtone effect.
Yes, so the singing style sort of mimics that, but of course the flexibility of the singing is very, very fast indeed. They move through these overtones very quickly, and they produce these lovely rhythmic effects.
Oh, that was an ensemble from Tuva with an example of overtone singing accompanied by Jew's harp. I've actually seen classes in overtone singing advertised in London as a sort of therapeutic technique. So it must be learnable, but it does sound very difficult to do.
I've always thought it wouldn't be that difficult. I've never mastered it, but the fact that I can do it badly with no effort at all makes me think that with a little bit of work I could probably do it quite well.
One of the most curious and widespread techniques in world music is falsetto. We had it in the West, obviously. It was written about in Europe in the Middle Ages. But the technique must be about as old as mankind's discovery of song itself. And in many parts of the world, falsetto is used where the song is supposed to have magical properties. In Papua New Guinea, on the islands off the east coast of New Ireland, young men sing the malira, or love charm songs, down on the beach, while holding a hair or a fingernail or some piece of clothing of the girl they want to fall in love with them. And this is a type of song called a warbat from Bulam village on Boang, one of the Tanga Islands near New Ireland.
One of the funny things in this piece is that there's some kind of a guide going on throughout, somebody talking and sounds like he's telling people what to do or how to sing it or something.
He's giving a translation in pidgin of the local words of the song, which are "woman, come closer, come along now, come up to me."
So is it a ceremony that he's conducting?
I think he's just trying to translate the words for the benefit of any girls who don't happen to speak the local language, or perhaps for the record producer.
one of the things you often hear in male singing is when tenderness or dreaminess or various other not traditionally masculine properties are to be expressed, the voice goes into falsetto. For instance, in West African dance music, there was a style of singing called old woman style, and people used to choose backing vocalists who could do old woman style. It just meant singing high.
Yes, it's obvious that there's a definite divide between women's songs and men's songs in traditional music. So there is really a taboo about a man singing a woman's song, but at the same time, as you say, they take over the style.
Yes, of course, men have a difference in their voices in that men do have a falsetto range. You know, men have a break in their vocal register, so you can make a binary choice if you're a man, whereas women's voices have a continuous register.
Well, today we'll be ending with a woman's song from Mongolia, the cradle of one of the largest and most powerful empires the world has ever seen, and home to some of its most unusual singing techniques. And this is a long song, so called because of its drawn-out syllables, and it's a duet between two women, Sumya and Orchibat, both of whom have marvellous open voices. They're using a kind of glottal stopped trill technique and a very subtle vibrato, and they're expertly playing with those tiny differences in their versions of the melody, which is known as heterophony, which is rather a dauntingly abstract-sounding word.
Heterophony is one of the most interesting ideas, though, and it's something that you hear a lot in traditional musics and not much in very organised musics. You hear it a lot in American folk music, actually.
It's a very basic principle.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Everybody sings their version of the melody, and as a result, sometimes you get unison, sometimes you get harmonies. But what you get are very fleeting, beautiful harmonies as people move in different directions through the melody.
And so we come full circle in this programme, ending with a song of praise for the gentle, warm sun that rises again and again throughout the entire world without ever setting. That was a so-called long song from Mongolia. Next week, Brian Eno will be playing unusual vocal music of religion and healing and discussing its techniques and approaches with the producer, John Thornley. Technical presentation was by Chris McLean and Graham Petrie-Brown. And if you'd like to know more about the music and recordings used in the series, you can either email the programme on world.music@bbc.co.uk or send a stamped addressed envelope large enough to take 3 sheets of A4 paper to the following address: Sounds from Within, Room 4006, BHXX, Broadcasting House, Portland Place, London W1A 1AA. And in case you are scrambling for pen and paper, I'll give both of those addresses again.
This is BBC Radio 3. Time now for World Music and for Sounds from Within, the second of 3 programmes featuring the most exotic of instruments, the human voice. This evening, religious, ritual and healing songs, and Brian Eno talks to the producer John Thornley. And you might like to know that at the end of the programme I'll be giving you details of how to find out more about the recordings used in this edition.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والمؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر ويقيمون الصلاة.
A Muslim call to prayer recorded in the medieval Islamic city of Samarkand in Central Asia. Welcome to this second programme of Sounds from Within, unusual voices from all round the world's traditional music. I'm John Thornley. My guest in the studio is Brian Eno. Today we have songs that are religious, ceremonial, ritual, magical and healing. Brian, what's your particular interest in religious music?
My interest isn't a religious one in the sense that I'm not a believer, but I do love the music that comes out of people's beliefs, if you like. I suppose religious music, more than any other, is a music of optimism. It's a music that has as its central proposition that everything's going to be all right. And that's a feeling I like a lot in music. It's very forward-looking in a sense. And of course, it also involves the sense of complete surrender. And that makes for very, very interesting singing. A lot of the great things that happen in singing happen when there's a kind of physical surrender to the process of singing.
وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَيُطِيعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أولئك سيرحمهم الله إن الله عزيز حكيم.
I must have maybe 30 albums of Calls to Prayer, and I think one of the reasons I like them so much is because you get a space to think between each phrase. And I think that's exactly what those spaces are for. They are for reflection and contemplation. Then the next sentence happens and you reflect on that. It uses more silence than any other form of music, I think.
We do have devotional recitation of this kind in the Christian tradition too, of course, in Gregorian chant, but it's much smoother somehow and much less dramatic. And we seem to have lost that throaty catch in the voice.
Yes, it's partially a linguistic thing in that Arabic has this sound, which enables you to have very dramatic endings to phrases. They really end with a very strong full stop. Our church music smoothed itself out because our churches smoothed themselves out. There was a disconnection of spirituality from the rest of life, I believe, and I think that shows in our church music. It's very sort of ethereal, whereas Arabic religious music is very, very powerful and quite earthy in a certain way.
It did have an influence on the singing in southern Spain, though, because of the Moorish occupation of Granada and Seville and Cadiz and all those places. And we can still hear it in flamenco. We're going to hear one of the stars of post-war flamenco, La Perla, from the city of Cadiz. She's singing a song about the Moorish quarter, La Moreria, in a bulerías, a flamenco dance song.
Ay, en tierrecita, primo de morería. Ay, que yo tenía una niña así que te vivita moradita ya de la morería. Ay, de allá de la morería, ay, Juanona le puso el cura, ay, Juanona todavía. Ay, várgame un teje, se me lo como Juanona todavía. Pasamos todas las tres, que me besó, que lo mató yo, que lo mató yo. Yo cogí una barquillita, pa' Fernando, que al mismo tiempo yo puse una voz, ay, ay, que ya, que yo, que ya, un lado del
If you could make a chart of the influence of Arabic singing around the world, it would be a very interesting story. Of course, it influenced southern Spain in that way, but one of the things that Alan Lomax points out in that book of his, Folk Song, Style and Culture, is that the more complicated societies seem to become, that's to say the more hierarchical and internally detailed societies become, the more singing reflects that. So that very simple societies like pygmy societies have big jumps, wide interval singing. That kind of thing, whereas the more complex societies become, Indian society, Arabic society, the more you have these very, very small shades of distinction from note to note.
Well, within the Islamic vocal traditions, there are lots of sub-traditions, and one of them is the Sufi ceremony. The Sufi are brotherhoods, mystical brotherhoods, and they attempt to achieve a state of union with God by reciting short rhythmic phrases in which they recite the names of God. And this one is from Egypt.
Yeah, this it's as much directed into the singer as it's directed out to an audience, in the sense that the practice of the act of actually making the music is part of the process of transforming yourself. So the breathing patterns in this are very, very important.
يا نافي لما لما نرتقى للنبي محمد بساط النور النور يا نعم النور النور في الحضرة ربنا بينا ربا محمد سبع سماوات كيطلع الألغان من عند فالحدود الحساب يا نبي وتعالى مدد يا مدد 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 سيدنا الحسين يا مدد يا مدد مدد يا مدد يا مدد اللهم وانا ضماني على النبي الله 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 إذا طورت للجميع السرائر تدل عليك الله والليل حاكم أثبتك التقوى مع التاج والحداد وفي الملأ الأعلى تداف البشائر وكم من فقير بات لا قوت عنده أصبح رزق الله في البيت ضامر وكم من فقير وكم من غني.
That was a zikr, a Sufi ceremony from Egypt. The breath, particularly the exhalation of breath, seems to be a very important part of the inbuilt musical instinct. And this kind of expression plays a part in the next piece we'll hear, which is a healing ceremony of the Semai people of Malaysia. The medium, who is known as Old Man Bitterness because of his biting humour, blows through his fist onto the patient's body, and then he intones a rapid chant, which was taught to him by his spirit guides. As he blows and sucks and claps his hands to release the illness from the patient, a second medium, because they're working as a team, takes over the sucking and blowing and clicking and shouting and the imitating of the cicada, and the first medium begins a song, which is accompanied by bamboo tubes and a chorus of women attending the ceremony.
One of the nice things about this recording, I think, is that you get a sense of the context of where it's happening. You can hear things going on in the background. I think it's a shame that a lot of recordings of ethnic music try to present the music as a little single, like something that you would go and buy in a record shop, and they separate it off from the sounds of people living their normal lives around the music. This is lovely because you can hear insects and people pottering about and getting themselves together to join in this ceremony.
Cho LB là om Saji amu wa sagulo ha am sob ayek teme da pero amulo ha untuk sa chong ba ke lang man na ye do ada
Oi mabalik kan mabunga at sida jung galing bunga
lagi ralo tidak kala tidak coba bunga teme
Halo, macam chat emoy. Baju mai entaya le barialo ke nami oi ma. Lore dok malau, de halaman oi malau. Ya, ya.
And that was a Malaysian healing ceremony. When I was in Western Papua New Guinea, near the border with Indonesia, a few years ago, I heard and recorded a lot of healing songs along the Upper Sepik River, including this one about Manimigat Sik, a man who has an illness. The illness is usually caused by drinking the river water or eating fish. I was struck by how many of these songs use a kind of falsetto yodeling in an ensemble where every voice seems to have its own melody intersecting with the others. In the village of Dieru, near Green River, where I recorded this song, they told me of the ceremony. They gather round the sick man, place in front of him the tumbuan, or shield, which is made of the bark of the sago tree with the clan symbol painted on it, and they prepare the medicine. And they told me that the medicine was the meat of a wild cassowary, freshly hunted and killed, cooked in an earth oven and eaten as a sort of sandwich with green banana wrapped in the banana leaves. And it sounds a bit rich as invalid fare, but they explained that this medicine is taken not by the patient, but by his male relatives who are standing around. And the sick man has sago spread over the sore place in his body, and meanwhile they sing this song to cure his buna, his bones.
So what are the instruments they're playing here?
These are two kundu, or hourglass drums. and there's a man blowing through a bamboo pipe. He turned out to be the local Lutheran pastor.
And he was happy to join in, was he?
He was very happy to join in. They have a very relaxed attitude to these things.
It's an interesting thing, actually. Outside of the West, people collect religions as you would medicines. You know, that one seems to work for this one seems to do the job in these circumstances. So obviously they do that there as well.
Well, that was a healing song called Sak Sak, or Sego, performed by a small group of the Abau people in the village of Djeru on the marshy plains of the West Sepik River, right in the middle of the island of Papua New Guinea.
Do you think that all of those people were trying to sing the same thing, or were they intending to sing slightly different versions of the same thing?
I think they all have their own individual phrases allocated to them because they were all singing in slightly different registers. It seemed to me that the way in which they were interlocking in totally different ways all the time.
Yes, that's right. When I listen to music, I'm always wondering, what are the people hearing? What are the satisfactions of the music for them? I mean, is it a purely ritual, functional type of music in this case, or is there a pleasure in it for them? And if there is a pleasure, does it come from the friction between the different ways of singing, for instance, or from the consonants?
I think there's both. They are trying to heal, and I think the idea is that the high notes, these high head notes, have such a power that they actually go through the bones, that they resonate with the body, and that they help to heal. But there's really a sheer pleasure in singing. They had quite serious expressions on their faces while they were singing, but there's a definite pleasure in making and interlocking these sounds, and a feeling of community, doing all this together. Well, another song I recorded on that same field trip in 1987 was in the Solomon Islands to the east of New Guinea, where the Melanesians have a much more gentle sense of harmony. In fact, it almost sounds Western. But they too have this kind of interlocking, repetitive style, a sort of trance-like style. And this song is a funeral lament, which is virtually in the minor key, sung by the women of the island of Guadalcanal.
It's a lovely thing that there are traditions of very quiet singing. It produces a quite different timbre in the voice, that sort of soft breathiness. And of course, the quieter you sing, the more easily you can stack harmonies. Something you hear in a lot of gospel music, especially American gospel music of, say, 30 or 40 years ago. It's a style that came both from church music, but also from sort of vaudeville, Mills Brothers, the tradition of those people who imitated instruments, presumably from a time when they didn't have instruments, and they learnt to mimic them. This is a song by the Fairfield Four. I think it was recorded in the late 50s or early 60s. It's called No Room at the Inn.
Well, there wasn't no room at the inn. There wasn't no room at the inn. When the time had fully come, that the singer must be born. There wasn't no room at the inn. The bellboy pulled and we tread, the mean and the good will be the witness of glory, for they saw that horrible look. Yes, they heard the manager say, when they turned the merry way, that there wasn't no room at the inn. Traveling on.
A weekend singing convention held in the 1950s in the Church of Fife, Alabama, where a large crowd of enthusiastic families gathered to sing from The Sacred Harp. That's a hymn collection which was first published in 1840, since when it's been popular in the rural South. Oh, this really is extrovert religion.
Mm-hmm. This is the kind of ceremony you sort of wish you were at, but
you're glad you weren't.
You're probably pleased you weren't, and you're not sure you want to hear it that often either on the record.
And the thing is that all the hymns that they sing are all in this style,
Mm-hmm.
very open-throated. You can just imagine the state of their vocal cords by the end of a day's singing.
It's interesting that the bigger the space that people live in or feel they occupy, the more the loudness of their music. For instance, shepherd music is an attempt to fill mountainsides with sound in some way. I think you can almost guess quite a lot about a landscape from just listening to the music that it has generated.
That's true. But there is also a transplanted music, a kind of music in exile, isn't there, where you have a kind of music which has been taken over lock, stock and barrel by an entirely different culture. Mm-hmm. The final piece we're going to hear is an example of that. It's a hymn sung by a choir from the Pacific island of New Hanover in Papua New Guinea. 100 years ago, a lot of Methodists came to that island and brought their hymns with them. And this is one which is sung in the local language, and it's called Dat by Jesu Ekaledat. And it's about those whom Christ has chosen to be with him on the Judgment Day.
It always seems interesting to me that when anybody else does Christian church music, it sounds better than the way we do it. I don't know why, but there's so much, joy in that. You know, it's not po-faced, it's not embarrassed, it's not ironic. It's just, we love this music, we love singing, here we are.
And with that hymn from the island of New Hanover in Papua New Guinea, we end this evening's programme of Sounds from Within. Next week, in the third and final programme of Exotic Voices, Brian Eno and the producer of the programme, John Thornley, will be playing recordings of unusual ensemble singing from all over the world, including choruses from Bosnia, Georgia, Tahiti, and animal imitations from the Eskimos of Hudson Bay and the islanders of Bali. Technical presentation for the programme was by Graham Petrie-Brown and Philip Ashley.
And now it's time for World Music here on Radio 3, and for the last programme of Sounds from Within, featuring the exotic use of the human voice in traditional music from all around the world. As usual, Brian Eno is in the studio with the producer John Thornley.
Hudson Bay, Canada. and that's an imitation of geese by the Inuit people. It's an example of katajak, a kind of game played between Eskimo women who blow into the cavities of one another's mouths. And the first one to break the rhythmic pattern is a sissy and has lost, which is the reason for the laughter at the end.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's so much playfulness in this music. Some of the vocal sounds that appear in this kind of game are so bizarre and so unusual. In fact, they do rather sound like whales, actually, some of them. In fact, animal imitation is actually quite a big thread of inspiration for a lot of traditional music.
That's true. On Bali, in Indonesia, you also have the kecak, the imitation of the cries of the armies of monkeys, led by Hanuman in the fight between King Rama and the demons who abduct his wife Sita. That's from the Ramayana. The sung and dance performances on the island of Bali.
Yes, I've heard kecak in different versions. I've never heard this one before, but I always assumed it to be a very archaic form of music, and then discovered that, in fact, it was a German choreographer, wasn't it, who actually formally wrote the piece based on traditions.
Yes, it was based on a much older trance dance, which was quite similar, with the men sitting in circles around one another, and they slowly unfold their arms so that it looks like a gigantic flower. Mm-hmm. It's really impressive to watch.
It's beautiful, yes. But it's very interesting to me that it was completely accepted and assimilated as part of the canon of traditional music by the Balinese within a year or two of Walter Spies writing the piece.
That's an excerpt from the abduction of Sita, one of the episodes of the Ramayana, as recorded in the village of Kuta on Bali. And it's an example of kecak, which was actually only invented in 1932, but those barking choral cries go back to a much older trance ritual. And now we're going to hear a sequence of unusual vocal sounds with, first of all, a tongue-twisting song from Bulgaria, sung by the trio Bulgarka, then a ganga, macho mountain music from Herzegovina. In the example we'll hear, the singers ask, what moves the heart of a real man? And the answer is a litre of wine and a good-looking girl. Then dancing and whooping at a nighttime beach party on the island of Yap in Micronesia.
Bakone vada teta ka, ne ta ka una ka. Use da se vaci. Mila mama use da se vaci teta ka, ne ta ka una ka. Bela mi. Bela menina teta qua, neneta qua, una qua. Belo lice.
In that sequence of vocal ensembles, we heard music from Bulgaria, Herzegovina, and Micronesia in the Pacific. And we stayed there for one of the most unusual vocal performances I've ever witnessed. It's the fire dance of the Baining people who live in Gaulim village in the hills above the harbour of Rabaul in New Britain. It's an imitation of the tongues of volcanic fire which flicker and flame up in the area, because there are lots of volcanoes around Rabaul. Even the airport is built next to one. This song is part of the initiation rituals, in which the men dance with large snakes coiled around their arms, dressed in demonic costumes. Curiously enough, this dance of fire is said to make rain.
What's lovely about that is that it's so visual. You really do get the sense of flames bursting up and flickering forth. And, of course, they never take a breath, it seems.
And the man shouting is shouting various instructions as the dance is going on. They're all dressed in costumes as demons. They all have snakes curled around their arms. And he's shouting, keep out of the fire, keep the children away.
But the flickering quality of that singing is beautiful, I think. It keeps threatening to burst out and become chaotic, then it dies down again and breaks forth again.
Well, that was the fire dance of the Aboriginal Bining people of East New Britain, illustrating a kind of extreme melodic virtuosity. And we follow it with two examples of sophisticated harmony. First, a Georgian table song sung at weddings and other festivities in the district of Guria, showing off the kind of embellished yodeling known as krimanchuli, which alternates rapidly between head and chest voice, and then an extraordinary choral song from Tahiti about a high priest of the island who left but was so sadly missed by the people that they persuaded the king to go and find him and bring him back. And then an extraordinary choral song from Tahiti about a high priest of the island who left but was so sadly missed by the people that they persuaded the king to go and find him and bring him back. choral music from Tahiti, from the island of Oparu, also known as Rapa. A song called Morotirinei, recorded only 5 years ago.
That is really one of the strangest pieces of music I've ever heard, I think. First of all, to our ears, of course, it sounds like faulty equipment. It's exactly what happens when your batteries run out on your tape recorder. And it's very, very difficult for me to understand why they would find this attractive. I see it as very, very impressive. It must be extremely hard to do.
Those technical problems of, let's say, the Georgian Krimanchuli or the Tahitian song we've just heard, they sound virtually insuperable.
Yes, and I presume these are not written musics either.
Absolutely
they're
not.
ones where you learn by listening and by taking part.
These are all oral traditions. The most amazing thing to me is that the Aboriginal peoples, the so-called primitive peoples of the world, seem to have developed this sense of ensemble singing to such a sophisticated degree. It obviously says something about the kind of society they live in.
Yes, Alan Lomax, who recorded a lot of traditional musics a long time before many other people got interested in it, I think, wrote a book about the subject, and he draws a lot of points about the kinds of societies which are capable of giving rise to very complex ensemble music of this kind. And of course, it's the kind of societies that spend all their time together and are extremely dependent on one another. Pygmies are a very good example of a people who use music in a very large part of their lives. A lot of the music is a kind of game that they play.
The Aka Pygmies, who live in areas of the Central African Republic, singing the Mukondi, or music to dedicate a new encampment. You can hear call signs and a kind of yodeling. And there's obviously an involvement of the whole community, isn't there? Because it's not a performance, it's an action.
Yes. First of all, there's a very much closer link between adults and children in pygmy communities. There isn't this sudden big distinction of people growing up. Old people play with children and obviously enjoy themselves. And in the same way, old people sing with children and obviously enjoy it. The act of singing is something that the whole community does. Everybody is expected to join in.
That was the Mukondi, music of the Aka Pygmies, which they sing when they've moved to a new encampment. Brian, thinking about all the vocal music of the world that we've been listening to during these 3 programs, and all the different styles of singing, do you think there's some kind of general connective thread?
Well, I suppose what I want to say to people is that traditional music isn't something else from what we do. I could easily take almost any of these pieces of music and trace its progress to the present day. And its progress to the present day would probably manifest in some or another form of pop music. What I make, and what a lot of other people make, is some kind of an ethnic music. Now, our ethnic music, the type that I make, draws very conspicuously from African and Arabic traditions, and of course old Irish, Scots and Christian church traditions and so on. More and more of the musics of the world, as they become aware of each other, start to become, I wouldn't use the word homogenized, but woven together. The other thing to notice, of course, is that the innovations in vocal style, since we live in a technological culture, are also technological. So a lot of people now who are working with voices a lot are using tape recorders, samplers, and a lot of groups, rap singers in particular, and Public Enemy in very much in particular, have become very good at using quite sophisticated technologies. One of the delights of this kind of music is, of course, that you can start to do things that no voice could ever actually do, like perfect repetitions, very fast syllables, that kind of thing. So I think there's a whole new future of vocal music.
Clear the way for the S to S, 1W. Clear the way for the S to S, 1W. Clear the way for the S to S, 1W.
Thank you to my guest in the studio, Brian Eno. And just to show that Western European vocal traditions can be just as inventive as those we've heard in today's programme, we'll end with one of the recordings that A.L. Lloyd played in his vintage 1966 programme, The Folk Song Virtuoso. It's a tralalero from the harbour of Genoa, a group of 7 or 8 longshoremen, a tenor, a baritone, an alto, that's a man singing a falsetto part called La Dama, and basses providing a pedal drone, as well as a couple of men imitating musical instruments. The song is one of workers or seamen emigrating and leaving their girlfriends behind. La partenza, the departure. On setting sail to go to Paris, we travelled night and day, thinking only of you.
La partenza.
That was a so-called Tralalero from the port of Genoa in northern Italy. And it ended this final programme of Sounds from Within, with Brian Eno talking to the producer John Thornley about vocal techniques from around the world. Technical presentation was by Marvin Ware.